Welcome to Mystery Unfolds, where the unexpected awaits. Let's uncover the mystery. House of Illusion. Episode 1. The Arrival. Elena's heart raced as she approached Thornfield House. The mansion loomed over the hillside, its gray stone walls cloaked in ivy and shadows. It looked almost abandoned, with its tall, narrow windows darkened, almost like soulless eyes watching her every move. The gravel crunched under her shoes as she stepped toward the massive oak doors, their intricate carvings worn by decades of neglect. She was here to oversee the restoration, a job that excited her. But as she stood there, she couldn't shake the feeling that Thornfield was more than just an old house. It felt alive. The caretaker, Mr. Crenshaw, met her at the door. His lined face was grim, his eyes narrowed as he handed her the keys without a word. She felt his eyes lingering on her, almost like he was trying to gauge her reaction. "People say this house has its quirks," he muttered, looking over his shoulder as though checking for unseen eyes. Elena laughed it off, trying to lighten the atmosphere. "I'll be fine, Mr. Crenshaw. I've stayed in old houses before." He just shook his head, muttering, "This one's different," before turning and walking away, leaving her alone in the darkening twilight. The house seemed to close in around her as she entered, swallowing the last rays of sunlight. Thornfield's silence was almost oppressive. As she wandered down the long corridor, she felt a cold, creeping chill that made her skin prickle. The mirrors lining the walls seemed to watch her, their reflective surfaces casting back distorted glimpses of her own face. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she heard the first of the noises. Soft, almost imperceptible footsteps outside her door. And then a whisper, a voice she couldn't quite make out, murmuring something just beyond the edge of hearing. Her heart pounded as she strained to listen, but as quickly as it had come, the noise faded, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. Episode 2. The First Sighting. The next morning, Elena shook off the unease from the night before. Thornfield was just an old house, full of creaks and groans from years of settling into the earth. But as she began her work, dusting the grand mirrors in the main hall, a chill crawled up her spine. She glanced at her reflection and her breath caught in her throat. There, standing just behind her in the mirror, was the figure of a woman. She was dressed in black, her face pale and gaunt, her dark eyes empty and sorrowful. Elena's pulse raced as she spun around, but the hall was empty. She laughed nervously, convincing herself it was just a trick of the light, an overactive imagination. But as the day wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woman's image lingered in her mind, and whenever she caught her own reflection, she half expected to see those dark, haunted eyes staring back at her. That night, the footsteps returned, heavier this time, echoing down the hallway outside her room. She clutched the sheets, her heart hammering as she listened to the slow, deliberate steps. Then, just as she felt she couldn't bear it any longer, the footsteps stopped. Silence enveloped the room, thick and stifling. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on her door, followed by a whisper that sent chills down her spine. "Elena." She bolted upright, breathing hard, but when she threw open the door, the hallway was empty. She was alone, or so she thought. Episode 3. The Ballroom Vision. Determined to find out more about the woman she had seen, Elena spent the next day exploring Thornfield's history. She came across a collection of old photographs in the study, dusty and yellowed with age. One photo caught her attention, a black and white image of a beautiful young woman in a flowing dress. Her expression was melancholy, her eyes haunted. Elena realized with a shiver that this was the same woman she had seen in the mirror. Elena was drawn to the ballroom that evening. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the sense of grandeur, the lingering energy of past celebrations. She stood in the middle of the room, imagining the parties that had once filled this space with music, laughter, and life. But as she turned to look in the mirrors along the walls, she froze. Reflected back at her was not the empty ballroom but a scene from the past. A lavish party filled with elegantly dressed guests, their faces painted with joy and laughter. They twirled across the dance floor, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating their figures. But then Elena noticed something chilling. In the corner of the mirror, almost hidden in the shadows, stood the woman in black. Her face was expressionless, her dark eyes fixed on the revelers with a look of profound sorrow. She seemed out of place, like a ghost haunting a memory that didn't belong to her. And then, as if sensing Elena's gaze, the woman turned and locked eyes with her. Elena felt an icy wave of despair wash over her. She stumbled back, breaking the connection, and when she looked again, the ballroom was empty. But the woman's mournful eyes lingered in her mind, like a stain that couldn't be washed away. Episode 4. The Lover's Tragic Story. Unable to let go of the mystery, Elena delved deeper into the records of Thornfield's past. She spent hours combing through old documents, letters, and journals, piecing together the fragments of a tragic love story. She learned that the woman in black was named Isabel, and that she had been deeply in love with a man named Henry. They had shared a passionate, forbidden romance, meeting in secret within the walls of Thornfield. But Isabel was engaged to another, a powerful, wealthy man who had no intention of letting her go. She and Henry had planned to escape together, to leave Thornfield and start a new life. But Isabel's fiancé had found out, and their plan was cut tragically short. The letters grew frantic, filled with fear and desperation, hinting that something dark had befallen Isabel. Elena's heart ached as she read the final entries in Isabel's journal. They spoke of a love so intense, so consuming, that it seemed to transcend life and death. And yet, there was an underlying tone of dread, as though Isabel had sensed her fate closing in on her, an inescapable shadow. That night, as Elena lay in bed, she heard a soft, mournful melody drifting through the air. It was a song of longing, a haunting tune that seemed to carry the weight of a broken heart. She closed her eyes, listening to the music, feeling as though Isabel's spirit was reaching out to her, sharing her pain, her loss, her unfulfilled love. Episode 5. The Room with No Mirrors. Elena's search for answers led her to a hidden staircase, tucked away behind a door she had initially thought was locked. She climbed the narrow, winding steps, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. At the top, she found a small, windowless room, empty except for a single chair in the center. Unlike the rest of the house, there were no mirrors in this room. A chill ran through her as she noticed faint scratches on the walls, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. The air was heavy, thick with an oppressive energy that made it difficult to breathe. She felt a wave of sadness wash over her, a sense of entrapment, despair, and hopelessness. It was as though the room itself had absorbed the anguish of someone who had suffered greatly within its walls. That night, she dreamed of Isabel locked in that very room, her face pale and streaked with tears. She was pounding on the walls, her voice hoarse and desperate, begging to be let out. Elena woke with a start, her heart pounding, her mind reeling with the knowledge that Isabel had been trapped, imprisoned by the very person who was supposed to protect her. Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Isabel's spirit was still bound to Thornfield, trapped in an endless cycle of suffering, her love for Henry denied even in death. Episode 6. The Haunting Whispers. The days at Thornfield grew more disturbing. Elena was constantly aware of whispers drifting through the hallways, soft and distant, calling her name. Sometimes the whispers grew louder until she could make out words. Fragments of conversations, pleas for help, and a male voice that she was certain belonged to Henry, begging her to free her. One evening, as Elena was working in the study, she glanced at a mirror and nearly screamed. Henry's reflection appeared beside her, his face etched with sorrow, his eyes pleading. He mouthed the words, "Save her," before fading away, leaving her feeling more determined than ever to unravel the truth. That night, the house was alive with sounds. The faint strains of a piano, the soft hum of voices, and the distant echo of laughter. Elena felt as though she were standing on the edge of two worlds, caught between the present and a past filled with love, betrayal, and heartbreak. Episode 7. The Final Letter. In her continued search, Elena found a hidden letter from Henry, tucked inside an old book. Written on the night they had planned to escape, Henry's words were filled with love and desperation. He wrote of his longing to be with Isabel, his fear of what her fiancé might do if he discovered their plan. As she read the letter aloud in the room with no mirrors, a gust of wind swept through, blowing out the candles. She felt a presence beside her, a hand on her shoulder, a whisper in her ear, "Please, set her free." The final confrontation came as Elena performed a ritual to free Isabel's spirit. The house seemed to tremble as she chanted, the mirrors cracking one by one. The dark figure of Isabel's fiancé loomed, a shadow of rage and possessiveness, but as Elena finished the ritual, he dissolved into nothingness, defeated. As the shadows lifted, Isabel and Henry's spirits were reunited. Their forms shimmered translucent as they embraced, finally free from Thornfield's hold. The house fell silent, the oppressive energy gone, leaving Elena with a sense of peace and closure. As Elena left Thornfield for the last time, she looked back one final time, feeling as though she had been part of something much larger. A love story that had transcended time, brought to a peaceful end by her efforts. Enjoyed the story? Subscribe for more thrilling tales and mysteries.